BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. I hope everybody had a good weekend. And just a couple of quick announcements and reminders before we begin. The first is that Wednesdays on this program are now devoted to an ongoing series about the Phantom Killer, an unidentified serial killer who operated in Texarkana in 1946. And yes, I've talked about the Phantom Killer on the channel in the past, but I really wanted to redo the most recent multi-part series that I had done, as well as looking at some new sources, as reading new books, talking about new theories, so feel free to tune into that one. And on the weekends, I have just launched a brand new series about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey from 1996, and I'm going to be exploring the ideas in the book Presumed Guilty by Stephen Singular, a book that I've wanted to read for quite some time. So if you would like to follow along with all of these true crime discussions, then I invite you to like and subscribe to the channel. And another great way that you can help out with all of these efforts is going over to BuyMeACoffee.com. There's a link to that in the description box. And anyone who makes a donation or contribution to help support the show will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. So the first thing that I would like to address is from an email that was sent to me by Andrew WVA. He wrote this into the email address, BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. Anybody can write the show there. And he says, "Hello, Ned. I came across an interesting video recently that focuses on Richard Gaikowski and his resemblance to some of the Zodiac composite sketches. The YouTube contributor is named The Lip Man, and he is an experienced artist and makes several interesting observations regarding Richard's physical characteristics, as well as his overall appearance. Around the 20-minute mark, he compares Gaik's passport photo to the Lake Berryessa composite, with some interesting results. One of the most compelling points of the video is how someone's perception of a face can differ depending on viewing it from a certain angle. Maybe some food for thought for an upcoming Zodiac episode. Regards, Andrew." And I did watch this video, the face of Gaikowski, on the channel The Lip Man. This is a channel that I had not heard of before, and it was a very good presentation, even though I'm not going to agree with everything. And to give the most basic introduction, the Zodiac Killer was a serial killer who operated in 1968 and 69 in California, in the San Francisco Bay Area to be precise. But there are several pre-Zodiac murders that could possibly, I repeat, possibly have also been the Zodiac, going back to perhaps 1962, is with the murder of Ray Davis. And I think that's the most widely discussed one that's given strong consideration. Some people think that the Zodiac Killer and the Phantom Killer are one and the same, but I don't personally accept that. However, the theories involving Gaikowski, though, do focus on the pre-Zodiac crimes, beginning with the Domingos Edwards murders in 1963, perhaps the murder of Ray Davis in 1962, but there's a bigger discussion about the murders in 63, the Swindle murders in 64, the murder of Sherry Jo Bates in 1966, and then actually getting to the Zodiac crimes in 1968 with the Lake Herman Road murders. And it's actually a theory that Gaikowski was a very prolific serial killer, and he only chose to attribute the Zodiac name to several crimes because he was a rather unpredictable individual, and there are some reasons for that I'll share later on, but more or less, there could have been an incident involving Richard Gaikowski and one of the Zodiac killer victims, Darlene Ferrin, who was murdered by the Zodiac on July 4th of 1969. This was the second Zodiac attack at Blue Rock Springs. Darlene Ferrin was also with Mike Mageau that night. Mike Mageau was shot, but he survived. And this is months after the first Zodiac crime at Lake Herman Road. And I was corresponding once with Tom Voigt of ZodiacKiller.com, and he said that he had spoken to Ken Narlow personally, and Ken Narlow's claim was that he could place Gaikowski in Darlene Ferrin's home within months prior to her murder. And Darlene Ferrin was also somebody who was known to have had frequent sexual encounters, and I think that I'm connecting a few dots here, and based on the info that was shared with me, and that is that there could have been a possible sexual altercation going on between Richard Gaikowski and Darlene Ferrin, or even an attempted sexual advance, and Darlene Ferrin humiliated Gaikowski in a sexual manner, and he was just so overcome with rage that he created the Zodiac killer persona as a way to rebuild his broken ego, because it's not until after the Blue Rock Springs shooting that the Zodiac begins the phone calls and then creates the name, the Zodiac, saying, "This is the Zodiac speaking." None of that happened after the Lake Herman Road murders, even though the Zodiac took credit for it and stated facts that only he and the police would know. So there's this video out there by the Lip Man that is talking about facial similarities between Richard Gaikowski and the composite sketch, and really it's among the composite sketches, plural. For example, this guy, the Lip Man, also includes the Lake Berryessa composite, and states that it is 100% the Zodiac. The one that you'll see with the darker colored hair and no glasses, and the man who has the very wide eyes, that was the Lake Berryessa voyeur, a man who was seen looking at three girls while they were sunbathing for an extended period of time. They said that he was somewhat attractive, very neatly dressed, and they were surprised that his shirt was untucked for that reason. But I'm not 100% convinced that that person was even the Zodiac, only because we don't know that. I mean, like, it's possible, but it is definitely not an established fact. The second point of contention was that the channel The Lit Man talked about a couple other Zodiac killer suspects, Rick Marshall and Arthur Lee Allen, and it stated that after the Blue Rock Springs shooting, the surviving victim, Mike Mageau, said that the killer was perhaps 5 feet 8 inches tall, maybe 195 or 200 pounds, beefy but not blubbery fat, so he's like a big guy but not what someone would call obese. And this guy said that we should rule out Arthur Lee Allen and Rick Marshall because their body types were much larger. And I also do not think that that is an acceptable answer because, I mean, just because Mike Mageau saw it, he didn't really know what he was looking at. He was getting bullets shot into his body, even one going through his jaw. I mean, he's just flailing around, even landed in the back seat of the car and then came out of the car for a split second. So it's really quite unreliable to hear Mike Mageau's testimony, no matter what he said. Even though he did actually see the Zodiac killer, I don't think that his witness description is extremely valuable, particularly with the height. And I do give credit to the Lip Man for providing a response about Richard Gaikowski's body type, and that is that there are numerous photos of Gaikowski where he has long hair and short hair. Some he looks larger, well, heavier, and others he looks like he is skinnier. His facial features change with his hair and growing out his beard, and his body type would change, gaining and losing weight. So he didn't look the same way all the time, which is consistent with something that the Zodiac killer openly stated in one of the letters, saying that He only looked his way when he would do his thing. And someone like Richard Gaikowski could pull that off. And also, this guy showed some full body images of Geik and talked about how his body was out of proportion. He had a very large torso and long arms but short legs, and he would have had an odd lumbering gait no matter what. And when you look at the photos of him, yeah, I can see that. And just a body type that somebody might refer to as barrel chested or might refer to as fat, but not like blubbery fat. Yes, depending on the photo of him. So I can follow all of that. And I think at this point, though, I need to be very frank with you guys because I rarely hold back what I genuinely think. And I don't think anybody would be super surprised if Gaikowski were indeed the Zodiac, but also if Arthur Lee Allen were indeed the Zodiac. So there is some big disagreement there. And when I did the suspect ratings episode, I gave Arthur Lee Allen a 5 out of 10 and Richard Gaikowski a 6 out of 10. I think Geik is a better suspect than Arthur Lee Allen, but there was also a point in the video made by the Lip Man where he talked about how people don't really provide solid reasons as to why Richard Gaikowski could not be the Zodiac killer. And I've been talking about this for ages here on Black Box Online Radio, but to do a little bit of recapping, Gaikowski was a homosexual, a schizophrenic, and a heavy drug user. He even spent time in a mental institution because of his schizophrenia, and he very clearly went on to live a homosexual life. I don't think the Zodiac Killer was any of those things, because the Zodiac doesn't appear to be completely out of control. The Zodiac is in control with his decision making and his ideas, and he would have had to have been a very, very high functioning schizophrenic to compose ideas the way he did in this very calculating way. But particularly the homosexual angle. I believe the Zodiac was a heterosexual male, and I think this is very evident from some of the choices the Zodiac made, targeting lovers' lanes with heterosexual couples, and also the Zodiac doesn't appear to do anything outside of his own sexual orientation, and or he doesn't do anything outside of a heterosexual orientation. I mean, to be quite clear. So I think that those are some points that people do need to consider. But again, because Tom Voigt has written into the show before, he shared some things in the comment section here on Black Box Online Radio, and that is that Gaikowski was someone who was confused about his sexuality. At the time of the Zodiac murders, he wasn't completely certain that he was gay, and he was trying to live a heterosexual life, and I hope I've got this right. And it was even to the point where he was trying to engage in relationships with some women. Women would complain about his behavior, almost like he was harassing them, although please don't quote me on that exact word. So the point is that Geik is somebody who wasn't living as a gay man during the time of the Zodiac crimes. But the final point that I would share with you guys about this video that was made by the Lip Man, which is about 30 minutes long, and I highly recommend you watch this video, is that he showed the composite sketch of the Lake Berryessa voyeur and compared it to some photos of Richard Gaikowski. And one of them, he showed up, and I thought, oh my goodness, absolutely, this looks nothing like the Lake Berryessa voyeur. One of the photos with Geik, and he has somewhat bushy hair, and he has his glasses on. But then the guy, the Lip Man, said, I think there's a very strong resemblance. Maybe it's just matter of opinion, maybe it's just people thinking in different ways, but I absolutely did not see the resemblance. I thought that almost certainly there is a different hairline, but I have to give the concession that Geik's hair could have been combed a certain way that would have made it look different. But different nose shape, different lower lips, and so to speak. But the nose, very, very clearly a different shape. Geik has a much wider nose than the Lake Berryessa voyeur composite, that is. We haven't identified that to a real person yet. But the points are that, number one, a composite sketch isn't necessarily going to be perfect or spot on. Number two, that this guy, the Lip Man, focused on the jowls, what he's talking about, and he's one of the few people to actually point out that Richard Gaikowski had a very rectangular face. Something that I've been saying for ages on Black Box Online Radio. And when you look at the composite after the Presidio Heights shooting, the the composite sketch of the Zodiac, which was done by an artist talking to the Robbins kids, has a very pointed chin. It does not have a rectangular shape at all. So says me anyway. And I think that Geik has a much more rectangular face, and the Lake Berryessa voyeur does have a rectangular face, and there actually is somewhat of a similar jawline. But even the Lip Man, someone who thinks that Richard Gaikowski was the Zodiac killer, or at the very least the best suspect, also points out that there's another Zodiac suspect out there named Lawrence Kane, also known as Lawrence Klein or Lawrence K. And Lawrence Kane had a rather similar jawline. And there are a couple famous photos of Lawrence Kane that are going around, and I've even shared a couple of them here on Black Box Online Radio. And I'm glad that somebody else also said that these are two photos of Lawrence Kane, and one of them is a little bit altered, but they look nothing alike. They don't look like the same person at all. So that also goes to show that Lawrence Kane would change his image, the way he looked would change with the years. He didn't always look the same way. And the final point from the video about the Lip Man was, there's a challenge question for you guys. If somebody does not have very strong credibility, should we discard their Zodiac killer suspect? And I think that the answer is twofold. Firstly, no. Secondarily, we do have to consider the place where somebody is coming from. If somebody is not genuine when they're presenting findings in the true crime world, yes, that is a strike against their suspect. Does it eliminate their suspect? No. Does it exonerate their suspect? No. But does it make us think less about what they have to say? Absolutely. And the two people in question were Blaine, the informant known as Goldcatcher, who brought Richard Gaikowski forward as a Zodiac suspect, and the Lip Man simply said that people have called Blaine's credibility into question. And then he also said Harvey Hines, the man who brought Lawrence Kane forward as a Zodiac killer suspect. Both of these people have had very strong challenges to their credibility. But here's the reason why you have to take someone's credibility and integrity and personal responsibilities into consideration in the true crime world. Harvey Hines was someone who stated that Lawrence Kane, his Zodiac killer suspect, worked in organized crime for the mobster Alan Dorfman. But Travis Miller of the Lawrence Kane WordPress went through the Harvey Hines report, and earlier this year he made the discovery that Lawrence Kane did not actually work for the mobster Alan Dorfman. He worked for a real estate developer named Albert Dorfman. And Albert Dorfman went by the nickname Al Dorfman, Alan Dorfman. Yeah, they're the same person, right? Nope. No, they were not. I mean, that might just seem like a simple mix-up, but the fact of the matter is Harvey Hines didn't get all the facts right. And this whole thing about how, Lawrence Kane is a criminal enforcer working for this mobster, not true. And that has been mentioned on some of the other Zodiac Killer news reports, and I invite you to visit the Lawrence Kane WordPress, which is run by Travis Miller, and he's been following the criminal behaviors of Lawrence Kane and the criminal history of Lawrence Kane for more than a decade. So yes, if somebody is going to make critical errors in their findings, which just absolutely shut the door on certain aspects of their theory, yes, I'm going to say that that is a strike against their suspect. But if you want to dispute that with me, you can put your ideas in the comment section down below, and I am always curious what you guys have to say. One more time, the video is called The Face of Gaikowski, available on the YouTube channel The Lip Man, and I invite you to check that one out. Now, to the next segment here on Black Box Online Radio, I have to give credit to multiple people for this one. There were multiple requests to talk about the murder of John Leonard from 1970, and people were just asking me, what do I think about this crime? Is it possible that it was genuine Zodiac activity? Because there is a composite sketch again after the murder of John Leonard, who was a taxi driver nonetheless. And could this have been a Zodiac crime? And actually, this case has received some recent news. It's been mentioned in the news recently, I should say, because the daughters of John Leonard were investigating nonstop, trying to find out who murdered their father. And I would like to go over to an article that is from WNEP News to help us out. John Leonard's case may be unsolved, but it hasn't gone cold, thanks in part to the efforts of his daughters. Lori and Debbie Leonard were just 13 at the time. I would like, and I think you two, and I know our three brothers always wanted as well, peace of mind, to know why it was done and who it was, Debbie said. The twins are the only two members of their family who are still alive. They're in their 60s now and are renewing what's been a lifelong investigation. In Lori's kitchen, the twins pour over the story of their lives and the story of their dad's death. Going back to September 8th, 1970, John Leonard was a cab driver in Cresco. On September 8th of 1970, he answered a call at the once iconic Buck Hill Falls Inn that was demolished in 2017. According to police reports, a man approached the cab carrying a shopping bag, and moments later, Leonard was found near his cab with gunshot wounds to his head. I repeat, Leonard was found near his cab with gunshot wounds to the head. Lori and Debbie remember that day like it was yesterday, but only now they are getting a look at the massive police case file. The Monroe County DA's office agreed to hand it over this summer after releasing part of it to a reporter. They gave us a 900-page report, and we're not through it yet, but we're finding so many inconsistencies and inaccuracies. So, I have to throw in one particular interjection, and that is that Ken Maines even talked about this on the channel Unsolved No More when he was doing the show The Hunt for the Zodiac Killer, and especially in the episode on Sherry Joe Bates on his YouTube channel Unsolved No More, where he just said that he's just encountering blatant inconsistencies, even to the point where it seems like some people might be intentionally deceptive, that they're just sharing false information because they either don't know, they don't care, or they don't want the truth to get out for some unknown reason. But back to the story of John Leonard. The twins have binders and notebooks along with note cards, newspaper clippings, and are passed on a large whiteboard in Lori's home. Lori's husband, Randy Zona, is helping with the investigation as well. Facts jump out at you, and as soon as we get a fact, we'll make a note of it, and we'll put it up there, and we'll see how everything lines up. Among the inconsistencies are some of the most basic facts of the case, including when Leonard died. The coroner's report said 1:50 p.m., but the state police report says 2:45 p.m. There's also a sketch of a possible suspect that was never released before this year. The coroner's report says 1:50 p.m. Oh yes, we read that line, but the sketch is what I think is connecting a lot of people to this because they believe that this person resembles the Zodiac killer. However, some of you may have caught on to some of these place names: Monroe County and the Buck Hill Inn, also known as the Buck Hill Falls Inn. And this is something that took place in Pennsylvania. And I mean, what is the Zodiac killer doing? Moving across the country and hiding in another state? Anything is possible, but when I did the series on the Moraga letters, or perhaps we should just call it the Zodiac Killer Moraga Connection, I had the opportunity to correspond with somebody who uses the YouTube name Sphere the Cube. I don't even know his real name, but we refer to him as Sphere. That's what he goes by online. And he found all of these clues about how the Zodiac Killer may have operated in the Midwest, and yes, it concerns some of the esoteric Zodiac language, such as using radians and inches along the radians. And he had an explanation about how his suspect, Robert Volvins, was in the Bay Area in 1968 and 69 and 70 and 71, and then out of the Bay Area for 1972 and 73, and then returns in 1974 when the Zodiac Killer would start mailing letters again, particularly the Exorcist letter, as well as the Badlands letter, because the Badlands, of course, are in the Midwest, and the Zodiac is talking about the movie Badlands, mind you. But firstly, the Badlands card might not be 100% authentic, and secondarily, I mean, there is some theoretical observations made by Spheri. They are not accepted facts by everyone. However, where are the Pennsylvania connections? And I think that this is going to go a little bit lower on the totem pole in terms of likelihood that the murder of John Leonard was actually committed by the Zodiac. The only points that really are there are that this occurred in 1970. The perpetrator was wearing some type of dark-rimmed glasses, and that he was a taxi driver, the way that the Zodiac Killer murdered Paul Stein, the taxi driver, in one of the confirmed attacks. So, I do admit that the composite is somewhat similar to that of the Zodiac, and as previously stated, the Zodiac Killer said that he was only going to commit crimes and not announce them to the world the way that he did before. But this one is going to be a very big stretch. However, no matter what, rest in peace to John Leonard, and it is very admirable and commendable that his daughters are keeping up with the search for the truth in their father's murder, even after all of these years. Now, I've talked to you guys about the book Exposed by Mark Hewitt, and I've been reading that one. And over the past couple Zodiac Killer news reports, I've been sharing some ideas about his Zodiac Killer suspect, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Mark Hewitt is a supporter of the Zodiac Unabomber connection, and one of the largest supporters out there. The other would be Douglas Oswell, who is the author of the book The Unabomber and the Zodiac. And I said very clearly that I wanted to read both of these books, and I'll talk about Douglas Oswell a little bit later on. But with Mark Hewitt's Exposed, he zones in on some aspects of Ted Kaczynski. And if you haven't heard the most recent Zodiac Killer news reports, I would like to do a little bit of recapping, because I think one of the strongest things about Ted Kaczynski as a Zodiac Killer suspect is the timeline. Ted Kaczynski had got a degree from Harvard for his bachelor's, and then he got his master's and PhD from the University of Michigan. Then he became a professor in California at UC Berkeley, and he decided to resign from his teaching position, and that was right after the Lake Herman Road murders on December 20th of 1968. It's actually in the beginning of 1969 that would have been his final term. And one point that Mark Hewitt has shared with me previously, and I believe he actually stated this in the Zodiac Killer Channel's interview with the Expert Series, which is something that I worked on with the Zodiac Killer Channel earlier this year. He stated that the first Zodiac Killer letter, the Zodiac said that he murdered 2 teenagers last Christmas, but the teenagers weren't murdered on Christmas, they were murdered on December 20th. And who would refer to December 20th as Christmas? Students or professors or people like school teachers, people who have a Christmas break or a Christmas vacation, and that could have been in the suspect's mind, no matter who it was. So that could actually point towards somewhat of a younger suspect. And then moving on to Ted Kaczynski's activities during 1969, his final day of work as a professor was June 30th of 1969, which is 4.5 days before the Blue Rock Springs shooting on July 4th, and Darlene Ferrin being pronounced dead on July 5th. So, right before the Blue Rock Springs shooting, he leaves his job and makes preparations to return to Lombard, Illinois, or somewhere nearby in the Midwest. Again, another Midwestern connection. Kaczynski would then go with his brother up to Canada to try and get not exactly a grant, but homesteading land, trying to secure a homesteading property in Canada just above the Washington border, drives back down south, and then mails the Zodiac letters on July 31st, and the August 4th letter, mailed sometime before August 4th, but it was received on August 4th. So they stated. And then he goes back to the Midwest, comes back, commits the Lake Berryessa stabbing and the Stein murder. And that's why those two were so close together. The Lake Berryessa stabbing happening on September 27th of 1969, and the Stein murder happening on October 11th of 1969. So Ted Kaczynski is moving around the country more or less, and this is how he could have evaded capture. But the strikes against Ted Kaczynski as a Zodiac killer suspect firstly come from Gareth Penn, who is the author of Time 17, but he also wrote a follow-up book called The Second Power. I have book discussions on both of these, and he said that just looking at Ted Kaczynski's physical appearance show that he has certain facial features and characteristics that are not mentioned by any of the witnesses, nor are they featured in the composite sketches, particularly the shape of his nose, that jawline we were talking about in any of the composites. I don't think Kaczynski is a match for those, so he doesn't immediately match the physical descriptions. He was 5 feet 9 inches tall, and I think that is possible, but yes, let's just leave it at that. It is possible. But when it comes to actually uniting these particular crimes, I think that something else that is in favor of a Zodiac Unabomber connection is the cooling off period. Ted Kaczynski was indeed a serial killer, and large amounts of time go on between his crimes and when he's mailing the bombs. And that shows some similarity to the Zodiac killer's activities between the Lake Herman Road murders on December 20th of 68 and the Blue Rock Springs shooting on July 4th of 1969, a 7-month gap. The Unabomber even had longer gaps than that. But after the Zodiac crimes have culminated, Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs, Lake Berryessa, and then the Stein murder, the thing I was reading most recently in the book exposed by Mark Hewitt is that the Zodiac killer, and let's say hypothetically, in his theory, Ted Kaczynski commits the murder of Paul Stein on October 11th of 1969, and he is so close to getting caught that he immediately says, I am never doing that again. He is only going to commit crimes from a distance. That's when the Zodiac killer starts talking about these types of bomb attacks. That's when the Zodiac killer begins to say that he's going to start mailing bombs, or he's going to detonate bombs, or he's just going to blow up children with a bomb. That is what the significant move was in his mind, in Kaczynski's mind. But, as you can tell, I'm not exactly on the same page with all of Mark Hewitt's observations, but also, I do think that the timeline is rather intriguing about Ted Kaczynski, and a point where I do, in fact, wholeheartedly agree with Mark Hewitt is that Ted Kaczynski did not care about the environment, and he didn't actually care about technology and industrialization. And the evidence that Mark Hewitt cites in the book Exposed are, number one, Kaczynski was a poacher. He also abused animals. One time he even stabbed a dog in the buttocks for almost just enjoyed inflicting pain on animals. He polluted, he destroyed the land, and he also showed absolute blatant disregard for other people, and even said that in addition to the Unabomber attacks, he would fire a rifle at planes that would pass over, and even one time a helicopter. He was unsuccessful in trying to injure them. He tried, but he failed. So I think that that just goes to show you that Kaczynski didn't love the earth, and he didn't honor and cherish the earth. And I can tell you my honest opinion on that. I believe, in every fiber of my being, that Kaczynski did those things because he wanted to concentrate. He didn't care about the environment, and the reason why he didn't like industrialization and technology is because it interfered with his concentration. That's why he's shooting at the planes, because they're making noise, so stated in the book Exposed. And also, an additional detail that I had not heard about Kaczynski before is that he would make booby traps for snowmobiles and like off-road motorcycles that would be nearby on the property, because again, they would make noise. And I thought that he just simply viewed the loud noises and the machinery as something that would interfere with his ability to concentrate, because he's some guy who had been rejected by society, rejected by women, went through a lot of emotional trauma at Harvard during the experiments that were conducted by Dr. Henry Murray, and then he goes on to just live this hermit lifestyle, just being alone in the woods. And I think that he did that because the only time he could ever experience a moment of clarity or inner peace is when there was absolute silence and he could concentrate, because he just viewed everything else as a threat, an intrusion, and also as an annoyance and an agitation. And his lone wolfism turned into destructive behavior, which is absolutely saddening. But, I mean, saddening for people who enjoy the lone wolf lifestyle. Not all people who take on the hermit roles will go crazy, but Ted Kaczynski gave them a bad name. So I will keep reading the book Exposed by Mark Hewitt, and I told you guys that I'm also in the possession of the book The Unabomber and the Zodiac by Douglas Oswell, and I cracked it open, and yeah, no, I didn't. It's electronic, it's on my Kindle. I read the first couple pages, and in the early parts of the book, the there isn't even a discussion so much on Kaczynski as Douglas Oswell was just sharing some different true crime stories, and I went through his citations and found that it was actually from an article from Law and Order magazine, and I really wanted to read it because he's sharing these little pieces of the true crime stories, but he didn't say the names of the victims, and there's always something humanizing about that. So I went back to Law and Order magazine's archive, which is available online at the website practicalhomicide.com, and I found the exact article that he was citing, and it says it's called Anatomy of a Lust Murder, and this is going to venture into some more of the true crime talk territory, but I did think that this was rather important for the overall true crime discussion. Author's definition of lust murder. Lust murders are homicides in which the offender stabs, cuts, pierces, or mutilates the sexual regions or organs of the victim's body. The sexual mutilation of the victim may include an evisceration, picorism, displacement of the genitalia in both males and females, and the removal of breasts in a female victim, also known as defeminization. It also includes activities such as posing, propping, and holding the body up, or the insertion of objects into the body or cavities, and it can even include necrophilia. Lust murders are predicated on the obsessive fantasies of the offender. It is not enough for these types of killers just to kill. They have a compulsive need to act out their fantasies with their victims and their bodies. This would be the signature component of the crime. And absolutely, this is not the Zodiac nor the Unabomber. The Zodiac killer did not mutilate the genitals of the victims. And there was a story out there that Cecilia Shepard was sexually assaulted with the knife at Lake Berryessa. She is the only female victim that was stabbed by the Zodiac. I mean, I don't believe Sherry Jo Bates was a genuine Zodiac killer victim, but she was also stabbed. And Gareth Penn even talked about her story, The Second Power, saying he began the book with an apology for misstating that Cecilia Shepard had been sexually assaulted with a knife. It doesn't appear that that happened. What it actually, I think this misapprehension comes from the fact that in the police reports it says that a large amount of blood had pooled in Cecilia Shepard's groin area, but she wasn't stabbed in the groin. She was stabbed like in the back and in the front, and the blood had simply pooled there. But the reason why I'm sharing this is just because it's about talking about the different types of criminals out there. And the Zodiac Killer and the Unabomber, both of them are definitely acting out fantasies, and they're definitely acting out power tripping moments, but they don't have this desire to handle the victims' bodies. A psychological perspective of the development and effects of the deviant fantasies and behaviors can be found in the psychosexual disorders, specifically sexual sadism, and others that are listed in the DSM-4. Lust murders may be classified as organized and disorganized depending on the psychopathology manifested in the crime scene. In addition, lust murders may have a homosexual as well as heterosexual orientation. In the case of Jeffrey Dahmer, all of the psychodynamics of lust murder were acted out on his male victims, some of whom were cannibalized. That is actually something that I do agree with based on everything that was read in that intro. And there are some serial killers that want to act out fantasies and turn their destructive tendencies into something very physical, and usually they're way more sexually oriented than the Zodiac or the Unabomber. The Zodiac is all about indirect sexual activity, indirect arousal. Just, yes, the thrill killing, adrenaline rushes, power tripping, all of that stuff. But actually trying to get physical with the victims, no. In both instances, however, the cutting and mutilation and overkill type wound structures will be directed towards parts of the body that the offender finds sexually significant. You see, that's something the Zodiac did not do, that the Unabomber did not do. No overkill. I mean, people talk about rage all the time. I think the reasons for that is because the Zodiac killer, especially, no matter who the Zodiac killer was, the Zodiac wanted to go back and live a normal life. The Zodiac didn't want to just tear the victims to shreds and leave a bunch of evidence behind. The Zodiac wanted to commit murders and then run away. And I mean, I'm not saying the Zodiac killer was a lust murderer or even that this article is insinuating that. This is simply about looking at the different types of serial killers and putting them into different categories. Lust murderers can also be distinguished from other sex-related homicide offenders by their involvement in necrophilia. In fact, the dynamics of lust murder and necrophilia are intimately connected. The Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy cases are an example of this dynamic. And I just want to share something interesting that I was discussing with Sphery, as I said, also known as Sphere the Cube. And he said that serial killers might do horrendous things, and they want people to know about some of it, and they want people to ignore some of it, or not know about some of it, or just to have secrets of their own. And immediately, Ted Bundy, after apprehension, did not want people to know about his necrophilia, that he would not only murder people but also have sex with the corpses. That was something that he wanted to keep private for a certain amount of time, but then eventually it did come out, meaning that serial killers have their own agenda, and then once they're caught and captured, they don't want to reveal their secrets as an open book. And with the Zodiac killer, I think there could be a lot of things that would be revealed that the Zodiac would not want us to know about, and mostly it would be who was he truly angry with, who did he actually hate, was it men, was it women, why were the victims chosen in the way they were chosen. And the thing that I've been thinking about recently, in answer to that final question, is that I'm starting to think more and more that the Zodiac dates were chosen at random, that the victims were chosen at random, and it was all just meant to be a bunch of confusing things. And no, I'm not the first person to think of that. I read it in a theory involving Don Chaney and Arthur Lee Allen committing crimes on days that did not have any exact significance to leave people constantly guessing. But you can always weigh in the comment section down below. What do you think happened? And I do appreciate Douglas Oswell writing out, or not writing that out. That article wasn't written by Oswell. That was from Law and Order magazine's issue on lust killers. And I appreciate Douglas Oswell directing us to there. And one thing I'd like to move on to is an email that came in from Barry Lauber, again, BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. And Barry says, Ned, thanks for all the entertaining and educational content. I always look forward to your updates. I've been listening to your content for 4 to 5 months or so I don't consider myself a Zodiac expert by any means. Hey, it's fine, I'm not a Zodiac expert either. But I feel every new episode brings me new information, so who knows? Perhaps someday I'll know half as much as you've gotten about the Zodiac case over the years. I've attempted to post several comments and questions on many of your videos, but for some reason only half of them actually seem to post. Yeah, that is the YouTube Autobots taking over, and they're terrible. I mean, they even delete things based on subjects. They will delete things that are based on links. They delete things that contain links, rather. Absolutely terrible. I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe it's the YouTube algorithm or something like that. So I figured rather than type out my message on YouTube, only for it not to post, I'll just send you an email. Great stuff. Bring it on. I was just curious, what were your thoughts on something that I was thinking about the other day after I finished reading a book by Tom O'Neill, which chronicles a 20-year investigation into the world of Charles Manson. His book is titled Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s. What I had been pondering was the idea that the Zodiac killer, along with all of the letters, could have been the result of an experiment, or a series of experiments conducted by the CIA during their attempts to create the perfect Manchurian candidate, or perhaps even psyop on society, or something to that effect. I don't know if you've read this book, but in case you haven't, it boils down to the fact that, at least during the 60s, certain individuals within the CIA's umbrella were experimenting with differing degrees on thousands and thousands of individuals without their consent. Okay, so the short answer is no, I have not read Chaos by Tom O'Neill. The longer answer is back in 2020, I first learned about Tom O'Neill, and the book Chaos was a hot topic, and I listened to his episode of Joe Rogan twice. That is the only episode of Joe Rogan's show that I've listened to twice, and I also watched several other presentations from Tom O'Neill on YouTube as he was promoting the book Chaos. I'm a little bit different these days because now I just buy the books. In the past, I would just watch the free content online and act like I got the full story, but knowing fully well that I did not. But I mean, you do learn things. Let's be very clear. By doing that, you do learn certain pieces of information, just not as much as the author intended you to. And I also became a regular listener to the Tate LaBianca radio program that would frequently discuss Tom O'Neill's findings, and so I've been a little bit connected to his material, but not perfectly. Some of this research was apparently carried out by the rather dreadful fellow named Dr. Louis Jolyon West, also known as Jolly West, who answered directly to Sidney Gottlieb, who was in charge of the MK Ultra program and its various spin-offs. Unfortunately, it is heavily suggested that Jolly West's human experimentation in many cases led to the deaths and murders of numerous individuals, including a 3-year-old girl whom was killed in a violent attack by an airman and who was receiving a specialized treatment from Dr. West at a CIA-controlled facility on the grounds of Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. The airman claimed to have no recollection of what he had done, and he seemingly lost much of his memory. The airman was later executed at the age of 33. Dr. Jolly West even worked at the very clinic Manson and his family would frequent on almost a daily basis. While Tom O'Neill cannot prove that Manson was ever Dr. West's patient, Manson almost certainly was a CIA asset according to witness testimony and documents collected by O'Neill during his 20-year-long investigation into the Manson murders. Tom O'Neill heavily implies, while he cannot prove, he believes Manson ordered his followers to carry out the murders at the suggestion of the CIA in an attempt to squash the hippie movement. O'Neill even goes as far as to inform the readers that a friend of Sharon Tate's, whom apparently was an intelligence operative of some sort, admitted to O'Neill that they had been aware of the murders before the bodies had even been discovered. There are a lot of stories like these in Tom O'Neill's book, and they sound absolutely loony. However, O'Neill seems to have documentation to back most of it up. And to jump in, okay, some points that are shared right there, because I've listened to things from Tom O'Neill in the past. What he talked about was that the CIA was very fascinated with how some people would take LSD and have a mystical spiritual experience, and other people would just get high, and then they would go back to normal and not have any true spiritual awakening or think about spirituality in a different way. And they wanted to find out why that was, so that actually led to the spiritual, or not the spiritual, that led to the experiments involving LSD. So I think that that is actually something that should be considered. As far as Charles Manson being an informant, I hope I can recreate Tom O'Neill's presentation on this, which again he shared on the Joe Rogan podcast. but he said that he was having somebody review his findings and sharing Charles Manson's arrest record. And the guy just looked at it and said, chicken shit, chicken shit, chicken shit. He was an informant. He kept getting arrested and being let out of prison. And an informant for whom? You'll never know, was the response that Tom O'Neill got. And we have to differentiate between operative and informant. Was Charles Manson a CIA operative? Almost certainly not. But an informant is someone whom they use to gather information. So I think that that is a much easier case to defend. Now, this idea that the same doctor from MK Ultra is trying to turn the Manson family into an army of programmed killbots that can commit murders at will, or even getting false memories about them, that is a hard thing to convince. That is a hard point to persuade people on. Because, as I said, I was a regular listener to the Tate LaBianca radio program, hosted by Brian Davis and Tana Laufenberg, and the host Brian Davis asked a challenge question to the audience. What is the significance of this discovery that Dr. Jolly West has a connection to the clinic where Charles Manson is frequenting, as well as MK Ultra, or as well as these experiments on LSD? And also, Barry even says this in his email here, that some of Dr. West's other prominent clients over the years were Jack Ruby, Timothy McVeigh, and Sirhan Sirhan. Okay, there's this one doctor who has connections to these people, but how do you get from that clinic in San Francisco to the murders at Cielo Drive? Like, how did that actually happen? How did this army of programmed killbots take place, a psi operation, or the experimentation on LSD? How did that actually create the Tate LaBianca murders? I mean, you want to talk about documentation. Where's the documentation of that? Now, when you do listen to Tom O'Neill, yes, some of these things do seem far out and extreme, but he presents his information in a very collected way, a very calm and collected way, and he doesn't come across as somebody who sounds like he's just raving mad or that he's making it up. But I will share one final thing that I did not know about when I was going through this Tom O'Neill material, and that is the comments that were made by Mae Brussel on Dialogue Conspiracy, her show that she did in the 1970s and into the 80s. Mae Brussel passed away in 1988 at the age of 66. But in the 1970s, she was talking about how it's possible that Charles Manson was an informant. So this doesn't come out of nowhere. And I don't give any discredit to Tom O'Neill. I like Tom O'Neill. I wish he had more stuff. It's a shame that it's going to take 20 years for him to write another book, but I'm sure he'll come up with something sooner. Chaos did very well. Some people were even saying in the comment section they were trying to buy it in either was it the hardback or the paperback, I forget which one, and it was all sold out on Amazon.com and they had to wait. And no, he uncovered a lot of information, and it is commendable, but that's the issue, though. To look at some of the connecting facts from the CIA connection to committing the Tate LaBianca murders, to having Charles Manson order the Tate LaBianca murders, then how do you put it all together? Everything else is very well documented. Was Charles Manson an informant? I am convinced of that. And to say something praiseworthy, Tom O'Neill has convinced me of that specific point. But I do appreciate the email from Barry, and let's not kid ourselves. Oh, it's possible that the CIA had a larger role with Charles Manson and the Tate LaBianca murders. Oh, it is indeed possible. But I approach things like that with a little bit of skepticism. And I would like to conclude this episode with your supporter comments from BuyMeACoffee.com and the super thanks. And the first one comes to us from Batman66, and who simply says thanks. And we also have one coming to us from Dave Alot. Maybe it's pronounced Alot. And Dave says, sat at the window this morning in Yorkshire, still dark and snow falling peacefully, hot cup of tea and BlackBoxOnlineRadio. Hey Dave, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated, as well as you, Batman66, and anybody who makes a donation on BuyMeACoffee.com or the super thanks here on YouTube will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And please feel free to tune in to the new series on JonBenet Ramsey and the Phantom Killer episodes that are coming out on Wednesday. That'll be all for me now. And anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there was always BlackBoxNed88 over on Instagram. And I will see you there for the bonus podcast. Goodbye.